Questions without notice. Are there any questions without notice? I'll give the call to the Honourable the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Minister for the Environment. Does the government still intend to reform the EPBC Act in this term of Parliament? And is the Minister aware of any impediments to its passage?
Order. Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting. No. The members was given the courtesy of silence, and the Minister is going to be given that same courtesy. She has the call.
Thanks so much, Mr Speaker. And it's a very interesting question coming from a former Minister for the Environment.
Order. No, we've just discussed about showing courtesy, as the Deputy Leader was. So let's just get through the first question.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. It's a very interesting question coming from a former Minister for the Environment who actually commissioned Professor Graham Samuel to review the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation Act, agreed with his recommendations, tried to get them through the Parliament and didn't manage to do it. So, having claimed that she would deliver environmental law reform, didn't. Mr Speaker, we have in the Senate right now Stage 2 of our environmental law reform. Stage 1 passed through this Parliament around this time last year. We established the nature repair market and, of course, we expanded the water trigger. Stage 2 is in the Senate right now, and if those opposite had any sense, they would vote for it in the Senate, because what it does is provide faster, clearer decision-making for business, something that business has been calling for, since 2020, when the former Minister reviewed.
Order. The Deputy Leader of the Opposition will cease objecting. So will the member for Moreton. Order.
Mr Speaker, I think the Leader of the Opposition continues to mistake aggro for strength.
That's
Order.
Stage 2 of our environmental law reform has something for everyone. It's got faster, clearer decisions for business. It's got much stronger environmental protections. What it does is establish Australia's first Environment Protection Agency. It also establishes Environment Information Australia, which would provide much clearer data about how we're going with the environment, and it would also provide information to business about where and how they can develop all of the projects that we know Australia needs, the infrastructure projects, housing projects, and so on. And the real mystery here is how those opposite, having commissioned Professor Graham Samuel to
the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
Good look at our environmental laws, were not able to accept Professor Samuel's recommendations given to your government when you were the Minister.
Order. Give the call to the member for Gilmore.
My question is to the Prime Minister. How has the Albanese Labor government used the last 2 weeks of Parliament to deliver for every Australian? And what has stood in the way?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Well, over the last fortnight of the Parliament, we have concentrated on major reforms that will make a real difference for people. Legislation to provide cost of living relief, including helping 40,000 Australians buy a home. Free TAFE, fixing HECS indexation, increased wages for early childhood workers, 15%. 10% starts next week as a direct result of what we have done. But we've also done major reforms to build and strengthen our future. Importantly, major aged care reform, the most significant reform in a generation. And we will have Future Made in Australia legislation passed in the Senate this afternoon. But we've also got important legislation on social media to protect our young people. We also have important migration legislation that will also pass the Senate later today. Indeed, the Senate is expected to pass more than 30 pieces of legislation just today, making a real difference, building more rental properties to take pressure off renters, protecting consumers purchasing buy now, pay later products, strengthening Australia's protections against money laundering, strengthening and modernising the Reserve Bank of Australia, legislating an objective for superannuation, making it clear that it is about a dignified retirement for more Australians. This is what it looks like to have a government that's prepared to work across the parliament to turn promises into progress. What those opposite have done consistently is just seek to oppose. We're getting things done, they're just getting angry, as we just saw during the last questions. We're acting responsibly, they're acting recklessly. We're cutting the cost of living, they're cutting Medicare pensions and housing. That's what they want to do. We're fighting for Australians to earn more and keep more of what they earn. They want people to work longer for less. We're fighting inflation, they're fighting amongst themselves. They talk a lot about industrial relations, but they have spent the last 2.5 years on strike. The last 2.5 years just saying no to absolutely everything whenever they could. Not putting up an alternative. Almost 3 years of the parliament sitting, this Leader of the Opposition is yet to come up with a single costed alternative policy.
Order. Give a call to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the Australian people cannot believe how incompetent and weak your government has been over the last 2.5 years. Your government has wasted $450 million on the Voice referendum, which divided the country, and your economic and energy policies have driven up the prices of everything.
The Leader of the Opposition will pause. The member for Moreton to be yelling when someone is asking a question is now going to be made an example of. You'll leave the chamber under 94A. Order. No. Maybe the last day for the year, but we're not going to be having this sort of behaviour. So it goes for everyone. The Leader of the Opposition will begin his question again.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, the Australian people cannot believe how incompetent and weak your government has been over the last 2.5 years. Your government wasted $450 million on the Voice and divided our country. And on economic and energy policies, you've done nothing but drive up the prices of everything. Prime Minister, why not call an election now to put Australians out of their misery and allow a competent coalition government to get our country back on track?
Prime Minister has the call. Order. No. Order. The Minister for Social Services.
You'll never get to go, mate.
Order. When the House comes to order, the Prime Minister now has the call.
Well, thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, that's not the first time that the Leader of the Opposition has called for an election, because he said we should have an election because we wanted to give a tax cut to every taxpayer. That was before he rolled over and had his tummy tickled and voted for it. Mr Speaker. And now he's suggesting that we should have an election, I don't know, New Year's Day. Talk about in touch. But he's got form when it comes to recklessly mouthing off, Mr Speaker. Remember, in the lead-up last year to Australia Day, he demanded a boycott of Australia's largest employer, Woolworths, because they didn't stock the right thongs. He dumped his own 2030 targets without warning his party.
Order. The member for Hume.
He talks about a referendum. He's promised another one. Mr Speaker. He hasn't mentioned it since, but he made that commitment before the election. He said that one of his nuclear reactors would produce a Coke can's worth of radioactive waste Well, he was wrong by a factor of, wait for it, 12,500. 12,500. He called for a national ban on TikTok before he set up his own account, Mr. Speaker. If you can't ban him, join him. That's his approach, Mr. Speaker. His schemes are half-baked. He has nothing but anger and recklessness. He has no costings, no detail for any policy that he is putting forward. Policy positions that barely survive around a breakfast TV. I don't know what he'll do next week when Ray retires, Mr. Speaker. His Thursday mornings, those tough interviews, I don't know what he'll do. Because there's no accountability from this bloke, no accountability, no hope from him, just note to everything. No hope, just note. And him, of all people, has the hide to speak about division with his record. Division with his record of seeking to divide people, whether it was the African community in Melbourne, whether it was all the other comments that he has made, his whole history of seeking to divide Australians, everything he has done points towards that. He's made a career on being angry and pointing at other people and saying you should be angry about them. That is who this bloke's character is, and the Australian people know it.
Order. Prime Minister's time has concluded. There's far too much noise during that answer. We're going to see if everyone can improve their behaviour for the remainder of question time. If not, there'll have to be actions taken. The member for Robertson now has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my question is to the Minister for Health. How is the Albanese Labor government working to make medicines cheaper for all Australians and strengthening Medicare? Why is the government so committed to restoring bulk billing after a decade of cuts and neglect? And are there any threats to Medicare?
Give a call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Robertson, because there is no one in this chamber who has a deeper understanding of what is happening on the front line in healthcare right now than the member for Robertson. Because when he's not in this building or he's not working hard as a local MP, he's pulling shifts as an emergency doctor at the Wyong Hospital, seeing every day the impacts of a decade of cuts and neglect to Medicare. And that's why the member for Robertson and everyone on this side of the House campaigned so hard on our promise to strengthen Medicare and make medicines cheaper. Mr. Speaker, those cuts to Medicare were felt deepest by general practice, the backbone of our healthcare system. Bulk billing was in free fall. General practice said that they were at a tipping point without further investment. And that is why we tripled the bulk billing incentive, Mr. Speaker, the biggest investment in the history.
Going to pause. I don't like interrupting ministers because I want to hear their answers. But the Deputy Leader of the Opposition is just going to continually give commentary or just roll through with non-stop communication. It's very, very difficult for question time to operate in that way, and I don't think anyone wants that. So, to help me hear the answer, I'm going to ask you to cease interjecting so that other members, perhaps who've asked the question, can listen to the answer as well. Minister, in continuation.
Even though we've become accustomed to the white noise, we stopped the slide in bulk billing, and I'm really pleased to report that there's been a rebound. An additional 5.4 million additional free visits to the doctor in just 12 months, Mr. Speaker. But beyond that, we also topped up the annual overall increase to the Medicare rebate. So in just 2 years, this Prime Minister and Treasurer have delivered bigger increases to the Medicare rebate than happened in 9 long years under those opposite. And along with higher payments to support practice nurses and a range of other things, this has really boosted general practice, their confidence, their financial integrity, so that what the college tells us now is that more GPs are bulk billing more of the time, and really excitingly, more junior doctors are choosing general practice as their career, Mr. Speaker. But we also promised 50 Medicare urgent care clinics, and as of today, we've delivered 82, and more will be delivered in coming weeks. 7 days a week, fully bulk billed. They've already treated more than 900,000 patients with high-quality, free urgent care, Mr Speaker. And, of course, we promised cheaper medicines, and we've certainly delivered on that. Last year alone, Mr Speaker, 22 million additional scripts to pensioners completely free of charge. We delivered the biggest cut to the price of medicines for general patients ever, and we finally allowed up to 6 million patients to get their scripts for ongoing chronic conditions for 60 days, not just 30. So, Mr Speaker, more doctors, more bulk billing, more free urgent care and cheaper medicines. This is making a real difference every day to millions of Australians. Now, we know there is more to do, Mr Speaker, and we are committed to doing more, because only the Labor Party will strengthen Medicare. Only the Labor Party, because we know you simply can't trust the Liberals on health.
Give a call to the member for Fowler.
Speaker, as we come into an end of the parliamentary term, I'd like to wish everybody a very Merry Christmas and a safe New Year, and looking forward to seeing you all again in 2025. But my question is to the Prime Minister. At my manufacturing roundtable in Fowler, people shared with me that they're grappling with the rising cost of energy, supply, labour, freight and insurance, to name a few. What steps have your government taken to tackle insurance costs, as it's adding to the cost of living for middle Australians?
Call to the Assistant Treasurer.
Thank the member for Fowler for a question and for the good wishes that she extends to all members of this House, and if I can return that to the member for Fowler as well. We know that Australian households and businesses are doing it tough, and insurance affordability is a key driver of one of those pressures. Since coming to government, the government has put in place a comprehensive plan to help address some of the drivers of insurance costs. And when you're looking at the key driver of insurance costs, it's the underlying risk, whether that's severe weather events, included severe weather events exaggerated by climate change, whether it's a century of poor planning decisions, inefficient or improper building standards, which means we're building the wrong houses and the wrong buildings in the wrong places, or indeed whether it's decisions of local governments or state governments, which are adding to the accumulated costs in insurance to businesses and households around the country. In fact, some of the immediate things that other tiers of government could do to address insurance affordability would be to address the stamp duty impost on insurance contracts, which is adding a tax on a tax for insurers, households and small businesses, or local governments, indeed, who continue to do dumb things by building the wrong buildings in the wrong places. And if there's anyone in this place who has the capacity to influence local governments in the decisions that they're making around approvals and planning processes, then that would add to improving insurance affordability across the country.
Order.
Now, Deputy Speaker, there are some things that the Commonwealth Government is looking at, and I want to, in particular, pay tribute to the fantastic work that the member for Fraser has done as chair of the House Economics Committee. Ably assisted, I see the member for Macquarie, I see the member for Calabria, who was instrumental in establishing this committee. A tremendous body of work has been put in place by this committee, 89 recommendations, some of them to government, some of them to industry and some of them to regulators. Over the coming months, we're working through those recommendations, and we'll have a response to Parliament and the community in the early stages of next year. But there is work underway at the moment, and that includes the establishment of the Disaster Ready Fund, $1 billion that we've established to spend over the next 5 years to put in place mitigation efforts, particularly in those disaster-prone regions, to ensure that we can firm up infrastructure and fund community and household-level improvements. We've established a housing insurance partnership so that we can have the data and information that insurers have available to communities to put downward pressure on insurance premiums. A lot of work happening, a lot more to come.
Call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. What progress has the Albanese Labor government made in the fight against inflation and helping with the cost of living? What obstacles stand in the way?
Give a call to the Treasurer.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker. Thanks to the member for Boothby, focused as always on the cost of living pressures being faced in her community and indeed right around Australia. We know that when we came to office, inflation was much higher and rising. Real wages were falling substantially and living standards were falling as well. And so even with all of the progress that we've been making across so many different policy areas run through a moment ago by the Prime Minister and in the Senate earlier today, our major focus throughout has been the fight against inflation and helping Australians with the cost of living. Now, we know that we've made really quite substantial progress when it comes to inflation, but as I've said on a number of occasions, we know that doesn't always translate to how people are feeling or faring in the economy. We know we've got more work to do, and that's why our cost of living help is so important. But any objective observer of what's happening with inflation in our country over the past 2.5 years would recognise and acknowledge that every aggregate measure of inflation is now much lower than when we took office. It's true of headline, quarterly and monthly. It's true of trim mean. It's true of non-tradable. It's true of trimmed mean. It's true of excluding volatiles. All of the measures of inflation, all of the aggregate measures, much lower now on our watch than they were under those opposite. And that's partly because of our surpluses, it's partly because of our cost of living help, it's about our responsible economic management, Mr Speaker. It's also because we are taking a very tough approach to the supermarkets in this country. And it beggars belief earlier today, Mr Speaker, when this side of the House voted for farmers and families, when this side of the House voted for a mandatory code for groceries with tough penalties, those opposite voted for a protection racket for the big supermarkets, Mr Speaker. They talked a big game, but when it came time to put your hand up for farmers and families, they abandoned them once again, just like they have vacated the field more broadly when it comes to the cost of living, Mr Speaker. Now, Australians are doing it tough. They would be doing it tougher were it not for our cost of living help, and they would be doing it much tougher under those opposite, Mr Speaker. We know that they are a risk to household budgets because we know their record. We know that at every turn they voted against cost of living help. And we know that last time they were in office they went after wages, they went after Medicare, they went after housing, and all of that meant that when we came to office inflation was much higher, wages were much lower, living standards were going backwards, and there was debt and deficits as far as the eye can see. Now, in the last 2.5 years, we've made substantial progress, but we know that there's more work to do. Our priority on this side of the House is getting inflation down, getting wages up, strengthening Medicare and building more homes, and we'll continue to do that despite the opportunistic opposition of those opposite.
Before I call the next questioner, the member for Casey has interjected 17 times since question time has begun. I may not mention the person's name, but I keep a tally on how many times people are interjecting. And if that behaviour is completely unacceptable, so you'll leave the chamber under 94A. Before I call the next questioner, I have a special announcement to make. I'm pleased to announce that present in the gallery today is Tony Calabria, the father of the Calabria family that has owned and operated the Parliament House institution that we all love, Aussie's Cafe, for over 20 years. He's here today with his family, and we recognise his years of service to the members, senators, staff and all of the thousands of people who have visited Parliament House. Tony, on behalf of all the members, we thank you for the many years of sharing with us your rich stories of life, work and your greatest love, your family. And on indulgence, I call the Prime Minister.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. Well, it is indeed a great pleasure to have Tony Calabria join us today. It's unusual to see him up there in the gallery rather than behind the counter at Aussie's. Tony is the man who did so much to enhance this seat of democracy here. You are so welcome. Parliament House is, of course, one of the largest buildings in the Southern Hemisphere and the most visited building in Australia. And your presence there is just absolutely extraordinary. It is, of course, such an institution that you and your family have made a part of, those of us who've been coming here for quite some time, whether as members or staff of the parliament, it's a part of our being home there. And it's a cafeteria where everyone is welcome, where lots of chats take place between people, and it is very much at the heart of this building in terms of its spirit. So you have been such an important part of this building. Can I thank you as well, make this point, that the discussions that you have, whether about football, different sorts of football, whether at the round ball game or rugby league for your beloved Canberra Raiders, or whether it be as a fellow Italo-Australian, we talk about the connections that are there between the Italian community in Australia, who of course have made such an enormous contribution, particularly to small business. Your commitment, your friendliness, my son, who's now 23, of course, has been coming there since he was in a pram. And now this week he was there having a cappuccino as a 23-year-old. We will miss seeing you every day in the parliament, but I'm sure we will run into you. And so to you and your family, you are much loved by everyone in this building, and we thank you.
And on indulgence, the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Well, I join with the Prime Minister in supporting his very lovely words in relation to Tony, who's been a feature of this place and a dear friend to many of us for a long period of time. In 23 years that I've been going to Aussies, I've never been to Aussies where Tony or Dom or Anna haven't been there, so I don't know what's happening at Aussies right now, but there may be staffers going for free coffees or something is happening, but it's wonderful to see your beautiful family up in the gallery today, Tony. Tony came here as a 14-year-old migrant to our country. He has worked every day since then. He's educated his children, he's provided a role model and has given that love to his family that has created a remarkable legacy. And Tony, to you, I wish you every success, mate, in your health and into the future. I know it's a wonderful joy to you to see Dom take over the business and now for your grandson to be involved in the business as well. And to all of you, I just say thank you very much for providing us with the warmth, the reception that we are greeted with, and the way in which you provide support to us, to our families and to everyone in the building has meant a lot to us, and it's a very significant part of our lives to celebrate 2 decades of your service to this parliament, and we celebrate your great migrant story, but most importantly today, the Calabria family, and I wish you every success into the future.
Give the call to the member for Hume.
Prime Minister, the Prime Minister promised all families will be better off under Labor. But instead, under Labor, interest rates have increased 12 times, core inflation is higher than every major advanced economy and is rising, living standards have fallen off a cliff more than any country in the OECD, and worst on record, we're in a household recession which is the longest on record. Prime Minister, how can Australians possibly afford another 3 years of Labor?
Call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Hume for his question. And the truth is that if he had his way, Australians would be worse off because they wouldn't have got the support that we have been prepared to support and sought support through this parliament. And those opposite, every Australian would have been worse off. Without our tax cuts, 84% of taxpayers would be worse off. 2.9 million taxpayers wouldn't have got a dollar. Without our cheaper medicines, Australians would be $1 billion worse off. Without the Medicare urgent care clinics, families would have missed out on 900,000 free doctors' appointments. Without our wage increases, 2.6 million award wage workers would be worse off. Without our energy rebates, millions of households would be $800 worse off. and almost 1 million small businesses would be $650 worse off. Without our cheaper childcare, 1.2 million families would be worse off. Without our HECS relief, 3 million Australians would have worse debts. Legislation that they voted against, of course, just this week. And we know what they think of free TAFE, because the Deputy Leader of the Opposition said it's a key principle and tenet of the Liberal Party: if you don't pay for something, you don't value it. So here we have
Order.
Free TAFE, Medicare. We want, when people go to the doctor, bulk billing. The whole idea is, we know it was the Leader of the Opposition tried to get rid of it, but we want people to be able to see a doctor. We want people to be able to get the course in free TAFE to make a difference as well. And those opposite have opposed all of those measures, and they've opposed, of course, our industrial relations changes that have seen thousands of workers be paid equal to the people that they're working with if they have the same qualifications, the same experience. And, of course, they opposed the increases in the minimum wage that we have done 3 times. Now, we want people to earn more and keep more of what they earn. What they want is for people to work longer for less. So whether it's strengthening Medicare, building more homes, cutting inflation from having a 6 in front of it to a 2 in front of it, making a difference there, or lifting real wages, all of those measures that we have put in place have been opposed by those opposite, and then they have the hide to speak about living standards. How about they just for once vote for an improvement in living standards and cost of living, because they've failed to do it for 3 years?
The call to the member for Blair.
Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Industry and Science. How is the Albanese Labor government backing manufacturing to deliver for Australians today and in future generations? Minister, what are the risks?
Call to the Minister for Industry and Science.
Thanks, Speaker, and thanks to the member for Blair for his question and also his continued support for manufacturing, especially across regional Queensland. And I know the member for Blair is a bit of a history buff, and he would know that tomorrow is 76 years to the day the first Australian-made Holden rolled off the production line at Fisherman's Bend in Victoria, captured in an iconic photo of a beaming Ben Chifley, a Prime Minister who actually called for car manufacturers to come into Australia instead of driving them out. And a government that was determined to reconstruct manufacturing in the aftermath of the turmoil of an awful global event, World War II. Similarly, the Albanese government committed to reconstructing manufacturing in the aftermath of a pandemic, where we saw that the things we needed most weren't there when we needed most, too reliant on broken, concentrated supply chains, need to stand on our own 2 feet, make more things here, a country that makes things, makes great, secure jobs. And so, from our point of view, we wanted to make a contrast from those opposite in the last decade, where they sent Holden and the rest of the car industry packing. They put manufacturing into a deep freeze. We're bringing it back out of the cold. 100,000 manufacturing jobs went under them, 70,000 have grown under us. And we have provided, through the National Reconstruction Fund, a platform to reinvigorate manufacturing. The first investments have started under the NRF, delivering, for example, security for our workers in our industrial heartlands. For instance, the 350 skilled jobs at RME in Toowoomba, that's being supported by the NRF. Now, I note the interjection from the member for Groom. Again, I said these people boo Santa. We are investing in his electorate. He's opposed to it. I remember when there used to be a member for Groom that backed Aussie manufacturing. Remember Ian McFarlane? Ian McFarlane actually championed manufacturing. And the only other industry minister on their side who got it was the one sitting next to the member for Groom, the member for McPherson. But apart from that, they just sneer at manufacturing, oppose the NRF, oppose energy price relief for our manufacturers, oppose tax cuts for manufacturing workers, opposed fee-free TAFE to bring in more skilled workers into manufacturing, and also oppose the NRF. We are about a country that can stand on its own 2 feet, giving great jobs to blue-collar workers. All they are about are photo ops and denying the chance for manufacturing to grow.
Has concluded. Call to the honourable member for Riverina.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Responding to New South Wales electricity blackouts yesterday, Premier Chris Minns was forced to concede, and I quote, "Solar production in the energy market starts to come off at 3 p.m, exactly when people start to return home. So if you could not use your pool filter, dishwasher, washing machine between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m, you'd be helping the grid." Minister, this was just one moderately hot day before summer. Is this what Australian families can expect under Labor's reckless race to 82% renewable energy by 2030?
Call to order. Give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank my honourable friend for the question. And yesterday I outlined to the House, Mr Speaker, the situation in New South Wales, which was that 5 power plant units were down, 4 coal, 1 gas, 3 to be expected, 2 breakdowns, Mr Speaker, and that did put pressure on the system. Now, it takes a particular level of prejudice against renewable energy to say that coal-fired power station breakdowns are caused by renewable energy, Mr Speaker. I'm not quite sure the logic there, but those opposite, I'm sure, have an explanation as to how that occurred. It's all the fault of renewable energy again, Mr Speaker. Now, I know those opposite are disappointed that actually yesterday there were enough energy reserves in New South Wales and there were no blackouts caused by a lack of energy, Mr Speaker. That comes as a considerable disappointment to the member for Fairfax in particular, who wakes up every morning, turns the light switch on and is disappointed when the lights come on, because he's more interested in political power than reliable power, as the member for Fairfax, Mr Speaker. Now, the member for Hume interjects. The member for Hume interjects. He's been very voluble. He's been very voluble. He asked me this morning, have I kept the lights on? And I did manage to give him an affirmative answer. But the member for Hume, to be fair, is an expert in these matters because he used to hold my portfolio. And they say it's responsibility of the Energy Minister to ensure no blackouts, and they have a point, Mr Speaker. The member for Hume knows a lot about it. In 2019, when he held my job, he gave a speech and he said, "There are real risks, particularly in Victoria, as we approach summer. It's important that we apply pressure to ensure there is balance in our electricity system because we have real risk of blackouts in Victoria this summer," the member for Hume said when he was Minister for Energy. And he says there were no blackouts. He says there were no blackouts when he was Minister for Energy, Mr Speaker. He says there were no blackouts, Mr Speaker. On the 25th of January 2019, 200,000 customers did not get power because of a lack of reserve when he was the Minister for Energy, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Now, Mr Speaker,
members on my right.
Mr Speaker, there have been no blackouts while we've been in office caused by a lack of energy. So it's Taylor 200,000, Bowen nil so far, Mr Speaker. That's the track record that we have. The member in the same speech, Mr Speaker, the member for Hume said that we need to ensure ongoing coal-fired power, and he said one of the Morrison government's top energy priorities is to avoid premature closure of coal-fired gas and gas-fired power stations, Mr Speaker. Following giving that speech, it was announced in October 2019 that Calabria would close, October 2019 that Loy Yang would close, March 21 Yallourn would close, September 21 Mount Piper would close, then February 22 Loy Yang, and February 2022 Araring, which you heard about on the radio. The New South Wales government didn't tell him, the company didn't tell him because no one trusted him.
Order. When the House comes to order, we'll hear from the member for Patterson.
Thanks, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. How is the Albanese Labor government delivering on key capabilities with a focus on the defence industry workforce, and what stands in the way?
Call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, I thank the member for her question. Yesterday I met with Patrice Kane, the world head of Thales, a global defence industry prime, which in Australia builds our iconic Bushmasters, and we've just selected them to produce 155 ammunition. And on Tuesday I met with Charles Woodburn, the global head of BAE, who of course build Australia's Hunter-class frigates. And together these two companies employ more than 10,000 Australians in high-skilled, high-wage jobs. And be it Thales or BAE, Australia's defence industry is growing. Indeed, in the last financial year, we spent $22 billion on Australia's defence industry, and that is a record. But the real challenge is finding people with the skills, and that's particularly the case for BAE, who in partnership with ASC will build our future submarines. And that is why we are establishing a skills and training academy at the Osborne Naval Shipyard in Adelaide. But what underpins all of that is a robust public TAFE system with free TAFE at its heart. And that's why this government has committed to that, 100,000 free TAFE places each and every year from 2027, building on the 500,000 places which have already been taken up since we came to power. Now, we know that those opposite think all of that is a complete waste of money. Indeed, it would appear that the alternative skills minister of this country thinks that TAFE is just a waste of time, and when it comes to the leader of the opposition, he barely uses the word TAFE. But AUKUS, quite apart from capability, will be one of the great industrial endeavours in our country's history. And just as the snowy hydro transformed our economy in the 50s and 60s, building submarines in the decades to come will take Australia's industry into the future. Now, the Coalition think that this can be conjured up if they just dance around the fire a bit more, chanting their slogans, yelling into the echo chamber, issuing press releases. But we understand that this future will be built on people. People with skills, skills acquired at TAFE. And so TAFE is now becoming a critical enabling capability of our national security, which is being completely supported by the Albanese Labor government.
Call to the honourable member for Fairfax.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question goes to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Can the minister confirm that the work of Frontier Economics that shows the real cost of the government's energy policy to be $642 billion instead of $122 billion is accurate?
The Assistant Minister, the member for Perth, is now warned. I haven't called you yet. Order. When the House comes to order, the minister will get the call. The Minister for Climate Change and Energy has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm particularly grateful to the member for Fairfax for the question. And this is a report that he released to News Limited while the Prime Minister and I were overseas. He gets a Profile of Courage Award, the member for Fairfax, for that, Mr Speaker, but good on him. And he released a report to News Limited. He said the government's costings are the biggest con job ever attempted, based on the Frontier Economics report, Mr Speaker, and he backs himself in today, and now he asks me to confirm whether the Frontier Economics report is accurate, if I recall his question correctly. And I'm happy to give the member for Fairfax some good news, because actually I was quite impressed with the Frontier Economics report, particularly page 6, which says, "We found the report modelling matched AEMO's ISP modelling results very closely," Mr Speaker. It went on to say, "Similarly, when we compare the sum of the real costs over the modelling period to 2050, we find the report modelling is about 91% the same as AEMO's ISP results," Mr Speaker. Yes, I do think that's accurate.
No, the member for Fairfax and the minister. The minister's completed his answer, and the Member for Fax definitely has completed his question. So we will now hear from the member for Bennelong.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Communications. How will the passage of the Albanese Labor government's minimum age for social media progress the government's broader online safety agenda?
Call to the Minister for Communications.
Thank you, Speaker, and I thank the member for his question and his ongoing advocacy and support on this issue of national significance. Mr Speaker, subject to passage in the Senate, we are on track this week to deliver world-leading reform in a novel and challenging space. The social media minimum age legislation will set in law the minimum age of 16 for young people to access social media. The Prime Minister stated his support for a minimum age earlier this year, and this sent a strong signal. The Albanese government is on the side of supporting parents and protecting young people. Our decision as a government to legislate and the fulfilment of our promise to introduce legislation this year was another important step forward. The national debate about this issue is ripe for our democracy, and it is clear that legislating a minimum age for social media widely reflects the views of our community. We are making significant progress against the markers set by Australians, and the latest YouGov data shows that we're on the right path. Mr Speaker, 77% of Australians surveyed support our legislation setting a minimum age of 16 for social media. The parliament is making progress. Furthermore, 75% of Australians surveyed support our digital duty of care, and 87% of Australians surveyed want stronger penalties for social media companies who breach our tougher laws. Now, the bill before parliament reflects this community expectation. It will strengthen penalties for systemic breaches of codes to bring them into line with penalties for privacy and consumer breaches, which are set at $50 million. And once passed, this legislation will sit within the broader suite of deliverables in the Albanese government's online safety agenda. We brought forward the review of the Online Safety Act by 12 months to ensure it was fit for purpose to respond to new and emerging harms. The digital duty of care is a significant step in response to the excellent work by Delia Rickard. We quadrupled ongoing base funding for e-safety to ensure they're equipped to do their important work. We established the inquiry into social media and its impacts on Australian society, and that's made a number of important recommendations that goes to the government's principle that online safety is not a set-and-forget space. We're undertaking the Age Assurance Trial, which will inform the types of technology that platforms can consider applying to assure a social media account creator is at least 16 years old. Mr Speaker, these online safety reforms are a matter of national priority, and I thank everyone who's contributed to the debate. I acknowledge our state and territory leaders who have engaged constructively through the National Cabinet to deliver this outcome. The Premiers of New South Wales and South Australia have been instrumental in this regard. Mr Speaker, I urge, and I hope that all members here, our Senate colleagues, to seek prompt passage of this reform to allow the Albanese government's important work to continue.
Call to the honourable member for Calabria.
To the Infrastructure Minister. The City of Bathurst's beautiful heritage CBD is becoming increasingly congested with a lack of parking to access local businesses and community events. The Bathurst CBD Community Car Park is a catalyst project between Bathurst Regional Council and Bathurst RSL Club, which would address this issue and has the potential to spark a new medical precinct. Will your government support this very important regional project for Bathurst?
Call to the Minister for Infrastructure, Regional Development and Local Government.
Thank you very much, and can I thank the member for Calabria for his question. He is doing what all members do, being a strong and clear advocate for the interests of his community. The Bathurst car park upgrade project, as I understand the member has indicated when he met with my office yesterday, is a project that is subject to application of round 2 of the Growing Regions program, which is making $393 million available for regional community projects. And as I said, he met with my staff about that yesterday. These projects, the applications, are currently under assessment. As the process is still underway, it would be inappropriate for me to comment on applications that are under assessment, and we need to allow the process to be completed in a fair way in accordance with the published program guidelines. Of course, round 2 of the Growing Regions program has been open for applications since the 5th of September, and closed on the 10th of October. In accordance with best practice, we will allow the assessment process and then departmental recommendations to be made before final decisions are taken, and will announce those outcomes when that is done. This is because we have done what we said we were going to do, and that is to deliver grants programs that are transparent and provide value for money. We have frankly cleaned up the appalling mess left by those opposite, whose legacy was of scathing Auditor-General reports, sports rorts, colour-coded spreadsheets, ignoring the grant guidelines of their own electoral benefit. We have improved the processes for grants and ensuring that they are merit-based with clear assessment processes. We have significantly improved the processes for grants, so much so that the Auditor-General has recently found, in 2 reports on the Growing Regions program, that the design and implementation of the program has been effective. It found that applications were assessed in accordance to the guidelines, something those opposite should pay attention to, and in accordance with the funding recommendations that were made.
Has the minister concluded her answer? Well, I was also checking with the minister whether she's concluded her answer. Thank you, Minister. Order. Order. The member for Rena is entitled to raise a point of order, and he is entitled to be heard. And he has the call.
My point of order is on relevance. The member asked a very specific question about a very specific project, and the minister should not delve into past programs, past governments, which were very good governments, I might add.
Order. The Minister for Industry and Science is warned. The minister was asked about a specific project. In her answer, she's entitled to do some comparing and contrast. She just needs to make sure her answer is being directly relevant to the project and in line with her portfolio duties. She has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And as I said at the start, this is a project that is a current application before the Growing Regions program, which I am talking about in relation to the audit report. It, of course, found that funding recommendations and decisions were made in accordance with the Commonwealth grant rules and guidelines. We have spent a lot of time returning integrity to grant programs, following, frankly, what was a shameful record of those opposite. We have, of course, had to deal with, which the member who's putting his hands up, which the member might like to inform himself, we have also had to deal with the legacy of robo-debt and the contracting arrangements that have resulted as a result of robo-debt from those opposite in all of our grants programs. A legacy they should be ashamed of.
The call to the honourable member for Tangney.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Education. What is the Albanese Labor government doing to build a better and fairer education system after almost a decade of neglect?
Call to the Minister for Education.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and can I thank my friend, the legend that is the member for Tangney. Mr Speaker, 2.5 years ago we were confronted with a mess in education. Childcare costs had skyrocketed by a massive 49% under the Liberals, and parents felt it. Public schools had billions of dollars ripped out of them by the Liberals. We saw the impact of that over the last decade with the drop in the number of kids finishing high school. And the Liberals also jacked up the cost of university degrees, ripped billions out of TAFE and university, and you see the impact of that today in the drop in the number of young people from poor families at university. Over the last 2.5 years, we've started the work of turning this around. We've cut the cost of childcare for more than 1 million Australian families, and now we're capping fees to keep prices down for parents. We're also making sure that finally we pay the people who care for and educate our youngest children properly. That 15% pay rise starts to roll out from next week. We're also fixing the funding of our public schools. We're putting billions back in after the Liberals ripped billions of dollars out, and we're tying that funding to real and practical reforms. like phonics checks and numeracy checks to identify kids who are falling behind, and evidence-based teaching and catch-up tutoring to help kids catch up. And, Mr Speaker, we're also making free TAFE permanent, and we're opening the doors of our universities wider to help more young people from poor families, from our outer suburbs and from the bush to get a crack. And to do that, we're doubling the number of university study hubs in the regions and in the outer suburbs. We've passed laws this week to massively expand those free bridging courses that help people to get ready for university. We've also passed laws this week that provide for the first time financial help for teaching students, nursing students and social work students while they do their practical training. And, Mr Speaker, we're cutting the HECS debt of 3 million Australians. This week we cut $3 billion of that debt, and if we win the next election, we'll cut it even more. The truth is, this is what only Labor governments do and what Liberal governments undo. And it's just the start. There's more to do to build a better education system and a fairer education system, to build the sort of skills and the workforce that we're going to need in the years and the decades ahead, to build the sort of country where your chances in life don't depend on who your mum and dad are or where you live or the colour of your skin, to build Australia's future.
Can we call to the honourable member for Lindsay?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Next week marks 3 years since the now Minister first promised Australians their electricity bills will be reduced by $275 if they voted Labor. Earlier today, in a train wreck interview with Sky's Laura Jays, the Minister refused to admit Labor has broken this promise, saying he was, quote, not walking away from that policy. When will the Minister finally be straight with the Australian people and admit Labor's $275 bill cut promise has been broken?
Give the call to the Minister for Industry and Science. That's the call.
Yes, thank you. I don't think I'm the Minister
for Climate Change and Energy.
Yes. Thank you, Mr Speaker. Thank you. Just got a bit confused for a second, Mr Speaker. Thank you. I appreciate the question from the member for Lindsay, and I'm delighted she was watching my interview with Laura Jays earlier today, where I pointed out, for example, that the inflation figures released by the ABS this week showed a 35% reduction in energy prices, the biggest fall in energy prices ever recorded in Australian history, Mr Speaker, as a result, direct result of government policy. Where I talked about the Australian Energy Market Commission report out today, which showed that the increased emphasis on renewable energy over the next decade will reduce energy prices by 13%. Where I talked about the impact of government rebates, which this government has introduced, and the member for Lindsay and all her colleagues voted against. Where I talked about the impact of coal and gas price caps, which we introduced, and all members opposite voted against.
The member for Mallee has.
So these are things that we are happy to talk about with the Australian people and with the opposition, because the opposition's track record when it comes to delivering real cost of living relief to the Australian people is appalling. And this government's track record is to take short-term measures to provide immediate relief and to take longer-term measures to put downward pressure on prices by introducing the cheapest form of energy, whilst those opposite want to introduce the most expensive form of energy, which is why modelling and analysis of their policies shows it would put up energy bills by $1,200 a year, which is a great result. The opposition might think, but the Australian people would beg to differ.
Well, the minister's concluded his answer. Order. The member for Fairfax. Okay. Trust me, I can hear you. We will now hear from the member for Lingiari.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Housing and Homelessness. Minister, how is the Albanese Labor government delivering on its promise to help more Australians into a stable home? And Minister, are there any obstacles that have stood in the way?
Give a call to the Minister for Housing and the Minister for Homelessness.
Thank you, Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member for Lingiari for her question. She is a hugely respected member of our caucus and a great advocate for Territorians. Speaker, we came to government in the middle of a housing crisis that's been a generation in the making, to find a Commonwealth which had completely vacated housing throughout the wasted decade. Remember, Speaker, that for most of the time the Coalition were in office, they were so tapped out of housing they didn't even have a housing minister. From those ashes, the Albanese government has constructed the boldest and most ambitious housing agenda that an Australian government has had for a generation. And it's not surprising that we've done that, Speaker, because the Prime Minister, the Treasurer and former Housing Minister, Minister Collins, have an acute understanding of the absolutely transformative impact that safe and affordable housing has for all of our citizens. Now, Speaker, it's been a really big week for housing. Measures that will pass this parliament this week will build more houses, better protect Australia's renters and give more Australians the opportunity to own their own home. Now, Speaker, these initiatives have passed the parliament because they have received widespread support across the chamber. And there is some serious housing expertise around this chamber, and I want to acknowledge some of the crossbench in particular who have worked closely with us. We've got, of course, massive housing expertise amongst the people behind me, Speaker, but I want to also acknowledge Senators Pocock and Lambie in the other place, and the member for Wentworth, Kooyong, Curtin, Indi and North Sydney, amongst others. I want the public to understand that we have been elected at a time when crossbenchers have also come into this parliament and they have done the hard yakka, Speaker. They've worked with experts, they've worked with stakeholders and they've engaged with our government, and as a consequence we are making better laws because of their contribution. Now, Speaker, earlier today I announced some really important amendments that our government will make to the Build to Rent scheme, which will make sure that that law provides better protection for Australian renters. It will build 80,000 much-needed rental homes for our country, Speaker, and it will bring more affordable housing online more quickly. These reforms are really broadly backed. It was a great bill coming into the parliament, Speaker. It's going to be an even better bill coming out because of the hard work and diligence done by people across this chamber. Now, Speaker, I want to compare that attitude to the reckless negativity that we see from those opposite. I mean, I spend a lot of time with crossbenchers, engaging with them deeply on housing policy. The Shadow Minister over here won't even attend a briefing about the housing bills that we have before this parliament. Now, we know that those opposite want to cut $19 billion from our housing program. They want to abolish Help to Buy, Speaker. They want to stand in the path of childcare workers and disability workers getting home ownership. Speaker, there's a really clear choice at this election on housing between those opposite and their endless no, 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 or a government of progress that will build, build, build. Thank you, Speaker.
The House comes to order. We'll hear from the member for Clark.
Speaker, my question is to the Attorney-General. Attorney-General, this government has undeniably declared war on whistleblowers. Despite promises before the last election to fix Public Interest Disclosure Act and Corporations Act whistleblower protections, we've only seen minor tweaks, and it's obvious you're kicking any meaningful reform into the long grass. So will you now, finally, actually do something to protect whistleblowers in this parliament or the next, including by supporting my bill to establish a Whistleblower Protection Authority?
The call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, for the question, and I thank the member for Clark for his question. Our government is committed to delivering strong and effective and accessible protections for whistleblowers. In June last year, he seems to have forgotten, the parliament passed priority amendments to the Public Interest Disclosure Act, which ensured immediate improvements to the public sector whistleblower scheme that were in place to ensure that they would be in place in time for the commencement of the National Anti-Corruption Commission. The reforms implemented 21 of the 33 recommendations from the 2016 review of the Public Interest Disclosure Act that was conducted by Mr Philip Moss. It was, of course, as he again appears to have forgotten, a statutory review that we put in place when I brought the Public Interest Disclosure Act to this parliament in 2013. Regrettably, the former government failed to act on that 2016 review by Mr Philip Moss. We did act. This was the first significant public sector whistleblower reform since the Public Interest Disclosure Act was first enacted a decade ago. The government is now progressing a second, broader stage of reforms, which includes the release of a consultation paper and public consultation on additional supports for public sector whistleblowers, including whether a whistleblower protection authority should be established. Submissions received as part of the consultation process are being used to inform the government's next steps for reform. And if I could just say something generally about the way in which the member for Clark and a number of other people approach the question of the operation of the Public Interest Disclosure Act. Before 2013, the Commonwealth had no protection for whistleblowers at all. Every state and both territories had legislated schemes of whistleblower protection. A Labor government legislated a scheme of whistleblower protection in 2013, and just to take the last year alone, there were 684 public interest disclosures. So far from the situation being, as the member for Clark and a number of other people would apparently wish to suggest, that there isn't protection for whistleblowers in the Commonwealth public sector. There is protection for whistleblowers in the public sector, and he should be doing more to create the culture in which there is an understanding of that.
Order. The Attorney-General has completed his answer. Order. The member for Clark's been here long enough. That is not acceptable under the standing orders. He's now warned. Call to the member for Hunter. The member for Hunter shall resume his seat. So I can hear the point. I don't have the call yet. You'll get the call. So I can hear the member for Clark on a point of order.
A point of order, Speaker. I'd ask the Attorney-General to withdraw that reflection on my character.
I thank the Attorney-General. The member for Hunter has the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. As the final sitting week of the year comes to a close, what progress has the Australian government made to build Australia's future, and what alternatives are there?
Call to the Prime Minister. Order. Order. Members on my left, when the House comes to order, the member for Sturt. Prime Minister has spoken.
Thank you, and I thank the superb member for Hunter, a giant of a man who's made a great difference, but I've got disappointing news for the member for Hunter because our candidate for Leichhardt is even taller than the member for Hunter, and he'll be here next year, Mr Speaker. I look forward to them sitting next to each other. Mr Speaker, over the last fortnight we have been delivering major reforms to make a difference, allowing people to buy a first home, increasing the wages of childcare workers, making things here in Australia through the Future Made in Australia, protecting children through our legislation for age stopping under 16s accessing social media. We are making a difference each and every day. Those opposite, of course, just say no to absolutely everything. I mean, talking to the Leader of the Opposition is like talking to an NPC, Mr Speaker, a non-playing character. Because it's just like a bot, Mr Speaker, that does exactly the same thing. The Opposition, in just the last 2 weeks, have committed to increase migration by imposing our student caps, stopping free TAFE, protecting dodgy private education providers, preventing Australians buying homes, blocking more rentals, keeping student debt high, stopping Australia make more things here, and privatising the NBN. It's not a bad record. In just a fortnight, that is what they have done. And today they've come in here and called for an election to be held with the New Year's week. The New Year's week. He has spent all year saying the costings on his nuclear policy are coming next week or next fortnight. The clock's ticking and it never happens. Tomorrow never comes. Tomorrow never comes.
The member for Fairfax.
And they're not just standing in the way, they want to take things away. These are things they've said they'll take away. Our tax cuts, debt relief, Medicare urgent care clinics, cheaper medicines, investment in renewables, help for people to buy, new rental housing, same job, same pay. All of those things they have said they will take away. The reckless arrogance of those opposite who haven't got the confidence to put forward a single-costed policy render them not an alternative government at all. Render them just a reckless bunch who will not put anything forward, Mr Speaker.
Order. The members on my left, the member for Hume. Order. The member for Hinkler can resume his seat.
And on that note, Mr Speaker, I ask further questions be placed on the notice paper.